Think about the worst financial decision you have ever made. Now ask yourself one honest question. Were you calm when you made it? You already know the answer. Every catastrophic financial mistake in history, every single one, shares one invisible fingerprint. It was made in a moment of emotional urgency, not ignorance, not stupidity, urgency. The investor who panic sold his entire portfolio in March 2020 was not unintelligent. He was afraid. The young professional who signed a lease on a luxury apartment she could not afford was not reckless. She was excited. The entrepreneur who wired money to a business partner he barely knew was not naive. He was desperate. Fear, excitement. Desperation. These are not character flaws. They are chemicals. They flood your brain, compress your time horizon, and hijack the one organ you need most, your prefrontal cortex, the part that calculates long-term consequence. And in that compressed, flooded state, you make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. History's greatest investors understood this better than almost anyone alive. They could not always name it. They could not always explain it, but they built entire philosophies around one central idea. Slow down the moment before the moment. There is a framework, never officially named, never formally taught, that lives inside the decision-making habits of legends. Buffett used it. Munger lived by it. Peter Lynch, in his own quiet way, applied it to every major call he ever made. Today, we give it a name, and we hand it to you. It is called the 10-10-10 rule. Before we give you the framework, we have to understand why you need it. Your brain was not designed for modern finance. It was designed for a savanna. A savanna where a threat 20 feet away was more important than a threat 20 years away. A savanna where immediate action meant survival. Delayed action meant death. That ancient wiring, that bias toward the immediate, is still operating inside you every single day. Neuroscientists call it present bias. Charlie Munger called it something simpler. He called it being human. Present bias is the reason you find it almost impossible to choose $100 tomorrow over $80 today. The reason a sale ending at midnight makes you buy things you do not need. The reason you took that job offer without sleeping on it. Now apply that same wiring to a stock that is dropping. Every second it falls, your brain reads it as a threat getting closer. The loss feels physical, the urgency feels real, and so you act. Not because the fundamentals changed, not because your thesis broke down, but because the chemical alarm inside your skull was louder than your logic. This is the enemy. Not the market, not the economy, not your boss, or your partner, or your circumstances. The enemy is the compression of time, the illusion that this moment, this exact moment, is the only moment that matters. The 10-10-10 rule is an antidote to that compression. It does not require genius. It does not require data. It requires only 3 questions, and the discipline to ask them before you act. The framework is disarmingly simple. When you are on the edge of a major decision, financial, professional, personal, you stop and you ask yourself 3 questions. How will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes? How will I feel about this decision in 10 months? How will I feel about this decision in 10 years? That is it. 3 time horizons. 3 different versions of you looking back. Now let us make this real. Imagine you are staring at your brokerage account. The market has dropped 11% in 3 days. Your portfolio, the portfolio you spent 2 years building, is bleeding red. Your phone is buzzing. Financial news is catastrophizing. Your neighbor just called to tell you he sold everything. In 10 minutes, how will you feel if you sell? You will feel relief. Immediate, chemical, powerful relief. The alarm goes quiet. The bleeding stops. You are safe. In 10 months, how will you feel if you sell? This is where the calculation shifts. If the market recovered, and historically, it always has. You will be watching gains from the sideline. You will have locked in a real loss. You will have paid taxes on that loss, and you will be waiting anxiously for the right time to re-enter, a moment that almost never feels right. In 10 years, how will you feel if you sell? Study any market correction in the last 100 years. Every single one of them looks, from 10 years out, like a gift. A brief window when quality assets were on sale. A moment when patient capital was rewarded beyond imagination. You will not remember the fear. You will remember only what you did with it. The 10-minute answer says, sell. The 10-month answer says, wait. The 10-year answer says, buy more. This is the power of the framework. It does not give you an answer. It reveals which version of you is making the decision. There is a moment in every person's financial journey where the 10-10-10 rule becomes hardest to apply. We call it the great filter. It is the moment when a good decision feels terrible and a terrible decision feels magnificent. It looks like this. You have spent 3 years living below your means, investing consistently, watching compounding begin its slow, quiet work. And then life hands you something that feels like permission, a promotion, a bonus, an inheritance. Suddenly, you are standing in a showroom, looking at a car that costs exactly as much as your first year of savings. And every single nerve in your body is saying, you earned this. In 10 minutes, you will feel pride, reward, satisfaction. You deserve this. In 10 months, the depreciation has already begun. The insurance is higher than you budgeted. The maintenance bill arrived in month 4, and a quiet, persistent anxiety has moved into the back of your mind, because the asset that was going to make you free is now making you fragile again. In 10 years, that money, compounded at even a modest return, would have been worth multiples of what you spent. Not just the number, the freedom attached to the number. This is the great filter. The moment the framework is most useful and most difficult, because the urgency here is not fear. It is euphoria, and euphoria is the more dangerous emotion. Fear makes you sell at the wrong time. Euphoria makes you spend at the wrong time. Buffett sat in the same house for 60 years, not because he could not afford better, because he ran the calculation, because the 10-year answer was always the same. The house is not the point. The great filter is not a test of your income. It is a test of your identity. Who are you building this for? The 10-minute version of yourself? Or the 10-year version? Warren Buffett famously refuses to answer questions about individual stocks at Berkshire's annual meetings. People assume it is legal caution. It is not. He has said, in various ways, that he will not make a public statement about a company unless he has thought about it for at least 24 hours. That is his 10-10-10 in practice. He is asking, what do I know that is true in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years? If the answer is the same across all 3 horizons, then he acts. If any horizon gives a different answer, he waits. Charlie Munger built an entire philosophy around what he called inversion. Instead of asking, what should I do, he asked, what would destroy me if I did it? This is the 10-year question, applied in reverse. Not will this feel good in a decade, but will I deeply regret this in a decade? Peter Lynch, managing Magellan Fund through some of the most volatile decades in market history, had a simple rule. Before selling any position, he would write down, in longhand, exactly why he was selling. The physical act of writing forced him to slow down, to move from the 10-minute brain to the 10-year brain. He later said that half the time he talked himself out of the trade before he finished the sentence. They did not all use the same words. They did not all use the same methods. But every one of them built a mechanical pause into their decision-making, a forced gap between impulse and action. That gap is where fortunes are protected. Here's how you build this into your own life. Starting today. First, create a decision threshold. Not every choice needs the full framework. Small, reversible decisions do not require 10-year thinking. But any decision that involves money above your defined threshold, any career move, any major commitment, that decision earns a mandatory pause. Set your threshold. Write it down. Make it a law you cannot break in the moment. Second, write the 3 answers before you act. Not in your head, on paper, or in a note on your phone. The act of writing removes the emotion from the equation. Your handwriting slows your brain slows your hand. In that feedback loop, you will often find your own answer. Third, look for the disagreement. If your 10-minute answer and your 10-year answer point in the same direction, act with confidence. If they point in different directions, that is the signal. That gap is the framework doing its job. That gap is your prefrontal cortex fighting back against the chemical alarm. Honor it. Fourth, build the habit before you need it. The worst time to learn a fire drill is during a fire. Practice the 10-10-10 framework on low-stakes decisions. The minor purchase you are considering. The subscription you're about to cancel. The reply you're about to send. Build the muscle now so it is automatic when the market drops 11% and your neighbor is calling. There is a question that every great investor eventually asks themselves. It is not about returns. It is not about strategy. It is quieter than that. Who am I in the moment of pressure? Because pressure reveals everything. It compresses time, it amplifies emotion, it strips away the strategy and leaves only the person underneath. The legends were not immune to pressure. Buffett watched Berkshire fall 45% in 1974. Munger lost almost everything in the early 70s before he ever partnered with Buffett. Lynch managed through the crash of 1987. Watching the portfolio he had spent a decade building cut in half in a single afternoon. They did not survive those moments because they felt nothing. They survived because they had a framework that made the 10-minute decision invisible, and the 10-year decision inevitable. That is what wisdom actually is, not the absence of emotion, the architecture that outlasts it. The 10-10-10 rule will not make you a perfect investor. Nothing will, but it will make you a consistent one. And consistency, compounded over decades, is the closest thing to a superpower that ordinary people can access. Before $20,000, your task is survival. After $20,000, your task is patience. But underneath all of it, at the foundation of every good decision you will ever make, is the same quiet practice. Slow down the moment before the moment. Ask who is making this decision. The 10-minute version of you, or the 10-year version, and then let the answers speak. This is how legends are made. Not in the good times, in the pressure.